What happens when a 15-year-old raised to worship a flag and taught that surrender is a sin, is handed a weapon and told to hunt a monster, only to have that monster reach out and save him instead? Picture a world collapsing in fire and smoke, where propaganda carved hatred into a child's bones, and the only future anyone promised him was a heroic death. Now imagine that promise breaking in the most human way, a stranger offering water, mercy, a choice. That fracture between what he was made to be and what he can become is where this story begins. And it doesn't end with a blast, but with a question. Who is the real enemy? Berlin, May 1945. Klaus is 15 and looks younger, a small boy swallowed by the ruined blocks of Kreuzberg, curled against cold stone and the smell of smoke. His Volkssturm jacket hangs off narrow shoulders like a costume, sleeves flapping. The cap is a joke on his head. Dirt streaks his face, his lips cracked, his stomach a constant gnawing ache that turns every thought to hunger. He's not a soldier by choice. He's a child taught to be brave, and in the silence between distant booms, you can almost hear the city holding its breath as something heavy waits just out of frame. He grips the Panzerfaust like it could anchor him to something real, cold metal against raw palms, the strap cutting into his wrist, the tube oddly heavy, heavier than his empty stomach, heavier than his years. 15 years old and already measured in weapons. Around him the rubble breathes smoke and ruin. In his hand is a promise he never asked for, to become what the war needs. This is not a soldier's choice so much as a parent's failure made weaponized Hitler's last desperate gamble. Boys in ill-fitting uniforms and old men shoved forward as if bodies could buy time. He holds it because they taught him to hold on. Klaus's thoughts sprint ahead of him, jagged images that won't stay still, mud-streaked faces, shouted commands, the thud of boots on broken pavement, then one face freezes every memory. The squadron leader, eyes like a gun barrel, hard as a sentence. The man's voice rolls through Klaus like a verdict, crisp and final. Fight until the last bullet, then use it on yourself. Those words are a weight around his throat, drilled into him for years until they felt like truth. He can still hear the cadence, the hush after it lands. It steadies him, it terrifies him. It tells him there is no other choice. The leader's voice rings in Klaus's head. Surrender is not an option. He doesn't just hear it, he carries it, like a stamp pressed into his bones. Since he was 10, since the black and red lectures and the marches and the promises of glory, that slogan has been taught until it stopped being words and became instinct. It steadies him now in the cold ruin, fills the hollow where fear lives, tells him to aim, to hold, to become the final hero the fatherland needs. It's a lifeline and a chain. And even as the guns speak, that command hums louder, refusing to be questioned. The indoctrination screams louder than the artillery. Americans are barbarians, monsters who torture and kill without mercy. It's not a passing thought, it's a constant roar hammered into him since he was 10, drilled at rallies, whispered by older boys, reinforced by a leader with eyes like a gun barrel who taught fear as duty. The words coat his hunger and his cold. They curl around his ribs and steady his shaking hands. In the rubble, with dust in his mouth and a Panzerfaust heavier than hope, that hatred is his shield, an iron certainty that drowns every question and makes the choice feel inevitable. A sharp, painful memory stabs through the static of his mind yesterday, his friend fumbling with the Panzerfaust, hands shaking, the brave face barely hiding hunger. The launch. An instant of blinding white, like a second sun, noise that rips the world apart. Then, nothing. No shape, no voice, just a silence that tastes like metal. Dust settles where a boy had been. The image won't leave him. The flash burned into his pupils, the empty space where a friend should be. He keeps it like proof of heroism, but it smells of ash and lies. The ground begins to tremble beneath Klaus's boots, a low, hungry rumble that crawls up through rubble and bone. It swells slow, then sudden, into a mechanical roar. Tracks grinding, metal whining, dust and smoke pulse with each step. Shapes move in the haze far down the street. They are coming. Every training voice in his head snaps taut like wire. Fear lashes at him, cold and immediate, but the voice inside months, years of training, acts like armor. He wraps himself in slogans and ritual like a coat, pulling the old mantra into the bright center of his head. Capture is a fate worse than death. The words steady his hands, narrow the world to one clear line of purpose. He remembers the leader's eyes, the final orders, the rumble outside. Everything sharpens into a single obedient beat. Hunger, smoke, and doubt are pushed back. He breathes. He will not be taken. He will not surrender. He peeks over the jagged edge of a shattered wall, dust and smoke scratching at his eyes like tiny knives, and for a heartbeat, the ruined city is only sound distant cracks, a coughing engine, the rasp of rubble under something enormous. Then the street answers, a Sherman tank, iron and thunder, grinding into view between collapsed facades, its wide tracks eating pavement and twisted metal. It looks too big for this broken world. It smells of oil and hot steel. Klaus feels very small. Too small, maybe, to matter. The tank rolls forward, its presence swallowing the street, a moving cliff of metal. The Sherman tank lurches to a halt, treads grinding, and metal whining through the ruined street. Its massive cannon swivels with a slow mechanical deliberation. The barrel becomes a black, unblinking eye that turns and fixes, staring directly at Klaus's hiding place. For a beat, the world narrows to that cold, focused gaze. Everything that follows hinges on it. This is it, the moment he's been trained for. The moment of truth painted in propaganda and promise. Around him, the city groans. Smoke tastes like ash. His oversized uniform rubs raw against bones that should still be children's. In his head, the fatherland has already handed him a medal, a hero's name whispered into history. Surrender is shame. Capture is death. Glory is a clean, noble ending. He breathes, slow to steady the trembling in his hands, feels the Panzerfaust's cold weight against his cheek like the weight of every lesson drilled into him, and steels himself to trade a life for a lie he no longer knows how to question. Klaus lifts the heavy Panzerfaust like it could sink him. The tube bites cold against his cheek, the strap chafing his thin shoulder, every muscle protesting the weight. His breath comes ragged, a small animal trapped in a chest. Dust fills his throat. Around him the city roars and commands orders, prayers, the silence before a bullet, but right now there is only the metal in his hands and the impossible stillness inside his skull. He steadies, squints through a haze of smoke, centers the Sherman in his sights, knuckles gone white on the trigger as his whole life narrows to this one pull. He centers the Sherman in his sights. His knuckles blanch white around the trigger. The Panzerfaust feels impossibly heavy, like the weight of everything they're asking him to carry. Time narrows orders, faces, the voice in his head, until all that's left is breath, aim, and the single decision. He steadies himself, measuring distance, imagining the blast, ready for the one pull that will make him a hero. He cradles the heavy tube against his shoulder like a sacrament, breath tight and shallow, knuckles so white they ache. Every muscle is braced for the kick that will hurl him back. For the roaring end, the fatherland promised him glory and fire. The final, tidy hero's death. Images flash faster than thought. The squad leader's gun barrel stare, his friend's last bright flare, the mantra about capture being worse than nothing. The ruined street is a single tunnel of sound and dust. Time shrinks to the span of a trigger pull. He wants the end. He waits for the blast and the title of hero. Klaus braces for the blast, counts the seconds drilled into him, holds the Panzerfaust to his shoulder, expects the world to end in fire. But there is no explosion. Instead, the smoke and ruin fall away for one clear sound, a voice, sharp and alive, cutting through the chaos. It's in German human, urgent, and for the first time the expected enemy voice doesn't sound like a monster at all. Then a voice, raw, human, cuts through the artillery like a knife. "Don't shoot, kid. Put it down." It comes from the tank, shouted in rough German but with an urgency Klaus has never heard. And for a boy raised to see tanks as monsters and enemies, that simple plea lands like a foreign object, loud, real, and utterly impossible to file away under everything he was taught. Klaus freezes. The shout rings in his ears like a radio playing the wrong station. Human, urgent, impossible. His body remembers everything the training drilled into him. Monsters, barbarians, no mercy. Surrender is shame. Capture is worse than death. His hands go numb around the cold metal of the Panzerfaust. His breath comes shallow. The world narrows to the weight of the tube and the script he's been taught to follow. And yet the voice is simple. It pleads. It warns. It does not fit the stories that have kept him alive. For the first time, the propaganda has no answer. He has the monster in his sights, one pull, one blaze, and he'll be the hero the fatherland promised. The Panzerfaust is heavier than his courage, his knuckles raw on the trigger. Every lesson from 10 years of indoctrination screaming at him, shoot, die, be blessed. But the voice was human. It didn't fit the map in his head. In that impossible beat, memories collide: the squad leader's gun barrel stare, his friend's flash of light, until something small and deadly clear starts to crack. What if the enemy isn't a monster at all? His breath stutters. The world narrows to a single impossible question. What should he do? The tank's top hatch screeches open like a broken skylight. A helmeted head appears, helmet dented, eyes shaded by grime, and for a suspended second, the ruined street falls silent. Dust hangs in the air. Guns seem distant. Klaus feels time thin as glass. Every limb holds its question. The world, waiting for a shot or salvation, holds its breath. Slowly, agonizingly, Klaus lets the Panzerfaust slip from his shoulder. The cold tube clatters and thuds onto the rubble below, a sound that lands like a verdict. For a second, the noise drowns everything: training, orders, the promise of a heroic end. Then it falls away, replaced by a tiny flicker of confusion, and the decision, for now, is made for him. He holds his hands up, trembling, empty and open palms turned out like a child's surrender, fingers stained with ash and fear. "Don't shoot!" he cries, the words cracking out small and foreign, no thunder behind them, just a thin sound swallowed by rubble and smoke. It's not bravado. It's a plea from someone who's been taught that mercy means death. For a moment, time narrows to that plea, to the ragged echo of his own voice, and he waits, waiting to see if the world will answer with the monster he'd been promised, or with something else entirely. 3 American soldiers climb out of the tank and fill the ruined street, big, battle-scarred men in mud-caked helmets, rifles held at the ready. They move with the calm, dangerous certainty of veterans, worn, watchful, disciplined. Up close you see patched uniforms, steady hands, and faces that say not rage but weary, business-like focused soldiers doing a hard, a human job. Klaus studies their faces the way a hunted animal studies a shadow, slow, searching, trying to find the teeth his world promised. He looks for snarls, for bloodlust, for the kind of animal fury his leaders had painted on every enemy. Instead, he finds weathered skin, tired eyes, and a careful, almost puzzled calm that makes his throat tighten. There is no roar. There is a pause. The childhood slogans feel foreign against this quiet scrutiny. For the first time in months, the certainty that kept him steady slips. The men before him are not monsters. He finds none. Instead of the roaring hate he'd been fed, their faces held something different, confusion and a painful pity. Klaus, trained to see steel and fury, hears his heartbeat loud in the silence between them. Those huge, scarred soldiers looked at a boy, not an enemy. Their brows knitted, not with triumph, but with disbelief that someone young had been sent to die. For the first time, the language of war didn't fit. Their eyes didn't accuse, they questioned. That small human hesitation fractures the shard of his certainty, leaving him exposed to a truth he wasn't prepared to accept. For GIs who had fought professionals across Europe, this was the kind of moral nightmare no training covered. Seasoned men who'd learned to read battlefield logic, now staring into the hollowed faces of children, boys who carried weapons like props in a play they hadn't written. Months of hardening met a single, unbearable question: what do you do when your enemy is 12? Orders blurred, instincts faltered. Some aimed to wound, others lowered their guns and looked away. The steady rhythm of combat gave way to hesitation, to pity, to a slow, aching compassion that felt almost illegal, and then, tentatively, one soldier stepped out from the tank and began to approach. One of the soldiers moves out of the tank and walks straight toward Klaus. He's bigger than the boy expected, broad-shouldered, hard-eyed, a veteran who's seen too much. And he's black, the exact image Nazi leaflets had twisted into a monster for 10-year-old minds to fear. That detail hits Klaus like a slap. The world he was taught to hate folds in on itself. His breath shortens, muscles tighten. Every drilled response screams to fight, to kill. Instead of fury, the approaching man's face holds something else, something Klaus has never been shown, and Klaus braces for the inevitable blow. Klaus flinches, squeezes his eyes shut, and pulls his whole world inward like a fist waiting for steel and fire, for the clean, ordered end his leaders promised. His breath comes ragged, taste of ash and old fear. Every order he swallowed drums in his head. No surrender, no shame, die a hero. He imagines the blow a final bright flash, then nothing, and braces, as if that vision could shield him. Outside, boots shift closer. He waits for the shout, the gun, the cruelty he was taught to expect. Instead, all he hears is the slow scraping of metal and a voice he does not yet understand. He feels no strike. Instead, something cool and metallic is pressed gently against his chapped lips, a canteen, an ordinary thing in an impossible moment. For a beat he panics, expecting teeth or steel, but thirst wins. His hands fumble, the rim trembles, and then cold water spills over his tongue and down his dry throat. The roar of shells recedes like a bad dream. The rubble, the uniform, the weight of the Panzerfaust blur at the edges. It is shockingly simple. It is shockingly human. He drinks until the canteen is light, and for the first time in months, he realizes he is not dead yet. Then, soft and steady, Wasser. The soldier says the German, a clumsy kindness from an unexpected throat. His voice is calm, deep, reassuring. The single syllable hangs in the smoke like a lifeline. Water, not a command, not a threat, a human offer. For Klaus, raised to hear only hate and orders to die, the sound is disorienting. The canteen against his lips feels suddenly less like a trap and more like mercy. The metal is cool, the word a bridge over everything he'd been taught to fear. In that moment, language becomes care, and care begins to undo a lie. He hesitates just for a second, then thirst wins. The canteen presses against his cracked lips, and the first swallow is electric, cool, metallic, impossibly clean water that trips down his throat like a small, impossible mercy. His shoulders unclench without him deciding to, his eyes close, and for a moment all the noise fades to the simple, urgent business of staying alive. It's the kindest thing he's felt in months. No shouting, no orders, just a stranger offering relief, and the shock of it lands harder than any shell ever did, leaving him blinking, bewildered, almost guilty for accepting it. The soldier speaks again, his German accented but gentle. "No one is going to hurt you." The words are plain, almost ordinary, and they land like a hand on a burning thing. For Klaus, they shouldn't make sense. Monsters don't promise safety, but the tone is human, calm, patient. He tastes the water on his lips, and the echo of every lecture he was fed since childhood rings in his skull, telling him to die rather than be taken. This voice does not shout. It does not threaten. It simply offers a choice, and in that awkward, stunned hesitation, the first crack opens in everything he'd been taught. In that single moment, with that single act of mercy, a decade of indoctrination shatters like glass. The slogans, the drills, the nightly stories of barbaric enemies all crack and fall away. The cool water on his lips is more than relief. It's proof that the world can be different than the one he'd been taught to love and die for. His fists unclench without him deciding to let go. His breath catches. Memories of a leader's cold eyes and a friend's last flash of light turn surreal, like a film unspooling. For the first time, confusion replaces rage, and uncertainty tastes a lot like possibility. He opens his eyes and truly looks at the man. Klaus blinks, and the world tilts. He expects a monster. He expects teeth and rage, and the final proof that everything he was taught is true. Instead, he sees a face tired, creased, very ordinary, an upturned mouth that might be worried, a pair of eyes that look back with steady, human pity, the grime on the soldier's helmet, the faded unit patch, the slow, unthreatening way he holds the canteen. None of it fits the caricature burned into Klaus's head. For the first time, the enemy is not a story or a slogan. He's a person, and that recognition splits something open inside the boy. He'd been fed hate like bread since he was a child, lessons, punishments, orders, die for the fatherland, no mercy for the enemy. So, when the man in the tank reached out, helmet shadowed, and pressed a cold metal canteen to Klaus's cracked lips while saying, gently, "Wasser," everything inside him jolted. The water tasted like disbelief. The soldier's voice was steady, not triumphant but sorry, the kind of quiet that cares for the weak instead of discarding them. This was mercy, not ideology. It was a kindness no squad leader had ever offered, a human touch his commanders never bothered to give, and it landed with the force of truth. Everything he believed is gone. The firm rules, the enemy faces carved into nightmares, the iron certainty that capture meant shame or death, all of it collapses in a single, quiet moment. The water on his lips unravels a decade of lies. The soldier's steady voice pulls down the blindfold that had been draped over his eyes. Confusion floods him, then a strange, raw clarity. The men who taught him to hate were the ones who sent him to die, and the strangers who spared him were, impossibly, humane. He stands on the rubble of his convictions, stunned and unmoored, watching the world redraw itself around a terrible, undeniable truth: mercy can undo indoctrination. Across shattered streets and muddy fields, this scene repeated, American soldiers, caught between orders and their own humanity, were making a choice. Grizzled men stared into the hollow eyes of teenagers, fed a lifetime of hatred. Regulations said, "Take prisoners." Instinct said, "Spare children." They lowered muzzles. They offered canteens. They crawled into foxholes to coax boys out, aiming to wound, not kill, choosing risk over reprisal. Those small acts, water, bread, a gentle word, spread faster than any order. Mercy became an unofficial policy, born not in briefing rooms but in quiet moments where a hand was extended instead of a trigger pulled. They held their fire. They aimed to wound, not to kill. They crawled forward under smoke, risking their own lives to coax terrified boys from foxholes. Calm voices, outstretched hands, small, deliberate gestures where bullets once would have been the answer. Those quiet, risky acts of mercy refused the easy violence and began to change the rules on the ground. The mercy didn't stay in the foxholes, it climbed the chain of command, awkward and stubborn, until it became policy and practice, if not on paper. Officers who'd stared death in the face now had to look at boys and decide, shoot or spare. They chose spare. Captured child soldiers were not processed like hardened POWs. They were pulled out of line, given extra rations, prioritized for medical care, and kept apart from the ideologues who would have finished their schooling in hatred. It was a pragmatic mercy, small acts that added up to protection, a tacit acknowledgement that these were victims to be rescued, not enemies to be punished, and it changed everything that followed. That unofficial policy of mercy was not just talk, it showed up in small, decisive ways. Boys pulled from foxholes received extra rations, got priority at the infirmary, and were stripped physically and ideologically away from hardened Nazi mentors. Commanders ordered men to aim to wound, medics to treat first, interrogators to delay the political questions. These measures were practical and humane: clean clothes, steady food, a bed. And they were deliberate, to protect children from adults who would corrupt or consume them. So when Klaus was led in from the rubble, he wasn't marched to a cell. He was walked into care. For Klaus, capture was not the end he'd been taught to expect. Instead of ropes or shouting, hands firm and careful guided him from the rubble. They didn't shove him into trucks. They offered a blanket, a dry crust of bread, a bottle of water. He walked between soldiers who kept their distance like professionals, not predators. It felt unreal. Safety wrapped in routine. His uniform was filthy, his Panzerfaust abandoned, but there was no triumph in their faces, only a weary, pragmatic kindness that unsettled him. He was being led away, not to death, but towards something he could not yet name. Led away with a strange, almost baffling gentleness, Klaus doesn't let himself believe it. He expects brutality. He expects hunger. He expects the slap, the barking orders, the cold floor, and the gnawing ache in his belly that never goes away. Years of drills and sermons have taught him to brace for the worst. He tucks that training into his posture like armor, keeps his hands where they can be seen, keeps his eyes low. Every unfamiliar sound makes him flinch. He practices his death calm, ready to swallow fear and obey the script he's been handed, because hope, in his world, has always been the first luxury they take away. He expects brutality and starvation. Instead, he finds order. A low-ceilinged shelter that smells faintly of soap, stacked blankets instead of mud, and a small metal basin that is his every morning ritual. 3 hot meals arrive on a schedule: simple but real soup, bread, a steaming ration of stew, and the shock of a full stomach is almost obscene. For the first time in years, there is a roof that stays put, a cot that doesn't shake with shelling, a guard whose job is routine, not menace. The relief is awkward, almost guilty. He eats slowly, testing each bite, while the idea of safety settles over him like a thin, unbelievable blanket. He watches the American guards. They move with a professional boredom, the same slow efficiency he'd imagined in grown men, the clean motions of people who have done this 1,000 times. No shouting, no cruelty. Occasionally, one will straighten a blanket, pass a bowl, or meet a boy's eyes with an awkward, quick kindness, a cigarette offered, a brief smile, a steadying hand on a shoulder. Those small gestures land like stones in his chest, unsettling and strangely comforting at once. They don't look like monsters or gloaters. They look like humans doing a job. For the first time, his fear and what he expects don't line up. At first, the change is almost invisible. Little gestures stacking up. Steady hands, offering water. A helmeted face that doesn't sneer. A bunk that's clean instead of crowded with orders. He lets the small human things in like daylight through cracked shutters, and then it happens. Slow, and then all at once. He understands he hasn't been captured by an enemy. What he thought was victory was a rescue. The rifles that surrounded him were not instruments of vengeance, but barriers against the real violence that made him into a weapon. The truth hits with a painful, freeing clarity. His whole world tilts, and for the first time he feels unarmed. He feels it like a weight lifting and then dropping all at once. He hadn't been taken by an enemy, he'd been rescued from one. Not a man in a helmet, not a tank, but the cold, crooked idea that told boys to aim and die for a lie. The slogans, the drills, the whispered orders that hollowed his heart, those are the true attackers. For the first time, he can see it clearly. People across the wire are kinder than his commanders, and kindness undoes doctrine in ways bullets never could. It's a quiet, brutal unmaking, and it changes everything about how he will look at the world. In the camps, re-education didn't arrive as sermons or textbooks, but as 1,000 small, stubborn human moments. A guard sharing hot soup, an interpreter teaching a word or two of English between shifts, boys trading stories in the barracks, someone fixing a torn boot, the awkward, patient kindness of men who treated them like humans first and enemies second. Those routines, meals at set times, clean blankets, questions asked and answered, a laugh shared over a silly joke undid indoctrination more surely than any lecture could. It was ordinary care, repeated day after day, that opened their eyes and let them question what they had been taught. Klaus watches them close, Herman Schultz among them, boys who once marched with firm, hollow eyes now leaning in, whispering like conspirators who found a dangerous truth. They trade small proofs, a guard's kindness, a hot meal, a word taught without scorn. At first, the sentences come broken, halting, as if the idea itself might shatter. Then, voice steadies, faces loosen, a laugh incredulous and raw. The Nazis were the ones who were wrong, someone whispers, and the phrase passes from mouth to mouth, not as victory but as a stunned, fragile fact that begins to rearrange everything they thought they knew. Months pass. The hollow boy who arrived on a single ration slowly fills out. Cheeks round, shoulders stop caving in, and the uniform hangs less like a shroud and more like clothing. Meals become schedules, sleep becomes normal, and the flinch at every distant clank softens into something quieter, an alertness that isn't panic. The fear in his eyes recedes like a tide. In its place is a hesitant curiosity. He watches the guards at their work, studies other boys learning to laugh again, points at strange objects, and asks questions with a voice that trembles but keeps coming, hungry for answers he was never allowed to want. Months pass, and the hunger in Klaus's eyes slowly softens into curiosity, until one afternoon, an American guard notices him watching, walks over, crouches down, and speaks in slow, careful English. "Hello then, thank you," and finally smiling, producing a small bar like a miracle, chocolate. The syllables are tiny, ordinary things, but their weight hits him like a revelation. Klaus mouths each word shakily, laughs in disbelief, then repeats them until they feel real. Those 3 simple words become a bridge, undoing an order, loosening a grip, planting the quiet possibility that the world beyond the propaganda might be ordinary, warm, and kind. The day of repatriation arrives like a small, impossible miracle. Klaus stands in a line of boys who look nothing like the soldiers they once pretended to be, hair a little longer, faces a little fuller, and someone hands him clothes that don't smell of mud and smoke. The tattered Feldgrau is folded away. In its place, sturdy, clean American garments that hang on him like a promise. He runs his fingers over the smooth fabric, feels the odd weight of zipper and button, and for the first time in months, he does not flinch at the sight of a mirror. He sees a boy, not a uniform, and the thought is dizzying. He returns to a ruined Berlin, not as a corpse for a lost cause, but as a healthy young man. Gone are the ragged patches and drawn cheeks. He walks in a sturdy, clean American jacket, soles that don't flap with every step, a canteen at his belt, and a small spring in his stride that used to belong to a ghost. The city around him is ash and silence, a landscape of collapsed facades and stunned faces, but he moves through it like someone newly given back a life. People watch, heads turn. And somewhere ahead, a woman still believes she buried her boy. He threads his way through a river of tired faces, women with sooty scarves, children clutching rag dolls, men with hollow cheeks until, like a knife, one profile cuts through the blur. His mother. She stands in the line the way people stand at a graveside, hands folded, eyes fixed on some private grief. For months, she had been living on stories of a dead son, a photograph pressed to her throat, a name whispered into the cold. He freezes. Everything he's learned about endings rewrites itself in a single heartbeat. She looks up, and in that look is the whole weight of what war stole. He finds his mother in a refugee line. She had been mourning a dead son, and the moment she looks up and sees him, everything fractures. She stares, then doubles over, and the world narrows to that single, impossible reunion. She collapses into his arms, sobbing with a sound that is half disbelief, half relief, as if she's been holding a blank place in her life, and suddenly the missing piece is returned. People around them fall quiet. He stands there, bewildered and steady for the first time in months. He is alive. He is safe. The weight of that truth settles like sunlight on ruins. Those handful of boys, alive, fed, wearing unfamiliar clothes, became living proof that the monster story had been a lie. Their whispers and tall tales flowed out from camps into bombed-out streets, into church basements, into the queues at soup kitchens. People listened. Mothers who had mourned began to doubt. Neighbors who'd drunk the propaganda felt the awkwardness of seeing youth returned. Eyes cleared, mouths that could name the enemy as an idea, not a people. These small, stubborn testimonies spread faster than any official line, seeding a counter-narrative across post-war Germany. Questions where there had once been certainties, and a slow, uneasy shift in how victors and victims were seen. The contrast was brutal and immediate. A regime that burned its own children as fuel for fanatics, and an opposing force that, in the middle of rubble and ruin, lowered rifles and offered water, bread, shelter. People saw it and couldn't unsee it. Rumors and photographs, whispered testimonies at displaced person lines, a simple canteen pressed to cracked lips. That gulf between ideology and humanity rewired minds. For many Germans, the image of enemy soldiers bending down to lift a scared boy out of a shell hole became louder than a decade of lies. It changed the story people would tell about who had been monstrous and who had shown mercy. It ends where it began, with an act of mercy. In a bright, humming processing center, Klaus sits among other boys, heads bowed, eyes raw from smoke and disbelief, each face a map of a journey too brutal to name. They are silent, because words would break them, because everything they were taught has been overturned in the barest instant. He watches a boy nervously rub his palms. Another stares at the ceiling like it might give answers, and for the first time he notices the absence of orders, only the small, slow ritual of being cared for. Somewhere at the edge of that quiet, a figure moves down the line, and everything changes again. An American soldier walks down the line, not with shackles, but with a cardboard box. His boots are quiet on the gravel. His jacket still smells like smoke and winter. The box is ordinary brown, dented, taped, but in that room it reads like treasure. Boys who had been trained to flinch now hold their breath. He stops in front of each one, lifts the lid with the same tired, careful hands he uses to load a rifle, and for a moment, war is reduced to a small, human gesture, giving, not taking. It is simple. It is disarming. It is mercy wrapped in wax paper. The soldier stops, reaches into the cardboard box and lifts out a single Hershey's bar, simple, ordinary, impossible in a ruined city, and holds it out to Klaus like an offering. He doesn't announce anything, he doesn't lecture. He just places it in the boy's hands. Klaus's fingers tremble. The foil crackles louder than artillery in his ears. He peels it back slowly, as if unwrapping a promise, and takes a bite. Sweetness floods a mouth that had known only bitter rations and harsher orders. Tears come, not from pain, but from shock. This small piece of candy tastes like mercy, like a life being returned. Klaus takes it. His hands still shake, fingers awkward around the small rectangle, the foil crackling loud in the ruined silent air. He's never seen anything wrapped like this, bright silver, like a scrap of something from another world, and for a moment he only stares, as if the paper itself might be a trick. The smell hits him first, a sweet, impossible scent that ghosts through memories of happier kitchens he can barely recall. He peels the wrapper back with slow, clumsy movements, each inch revealing more color, more normalcy, and for the first time since the rubble, something in him loosens. He takes a careful bite, the foil crackling as tiny shards of light fall away. The chocolate melts almost instantly, warm and impossibly sweet, a simple pleasure that feels outlawed by the world he knew. For a second, the taste becomes memory, his mother's hand, a stolen piece of candy behind closed doors, sunlight through a shattered window, small things that had been written out of his life by orders and slogans. The flavor hits him like a promise. Ordinary kindness exists. It isn't just sugar on his tongue, it's a map back to a childhood he was told to burn, and something tight and furious loosens inside him. He takes that bite and something inside him cracks, sudden, messy, unstoppable, and he begins to cry, not from fear or pain, not from the immediate weight of years, but because the neat lies he'd been fed have unraveled in the soft melt of chocolate. Everything they taught him about enemies and monsters doesn't fit this small, warm, ordinary sweetness. The tears are a tangle. Fury at being used, sorrow for the childhood stolen, and a strange, stunned gratitude for a mercy he never expected. Chocolate on his lips, he realizes the world he believed in was a lie, and for the first time, he can feel the truth. He cries hard, quiet at first, then ragged, because the men he'd been planted to hate have given him something no commander ever did, a small, unearned mercy. The Hershey's bar melts on his tongue, sweet and blasphemous. But it's more than sugar, it's a tiny packet of normalcy, human care folded into foil. In that single ridiculous moment, the textbooks, the rallies, the shouted orders, all feel like paper candles snuffed by one warm hand. Forgiveness tastes like chocolate, hope tastes like sugar. For a boy taught to die for a lie, that taste is the first real promise of a future. In the end, it boiled down to a small, almost painfully simple truth. Even in the ashes of the world's most brutal war, mercy still flickered a soldier offering water, a canteen pressed to chapped lips, a Hershey's bar passed across a palm, tiny, human things that dismantled a decade of lies. Klaus's tears were not just relief, they were the sound of a mind unshackling itself, of a country beginning to learn that compassion could be stronger than propaganda. Those gestures rewrote the last page of his childhood, and it leaves us with the question that echoes through history. When faced with an enemy taught to hate you, what choice do you make?